You get so much out of these sessions. So over to you, Gitanjali.
Thank you, James, for such a generous introduction. Now I can only disappoint. So, namaste, everyone. We start with the Shanti part.
ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावतीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
May He fill us and protect us. May He nourish us and sustain us. May we become luminous in learning. May there be no dispute. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. This is the Shanti part from Krishna Yajurveda, of which Kathopanishad forms a part. Let's hold this Shanti part for a minute, and maybe we will come to this, that why we chose this for today's session. Now, aging is a myth, dying a bad habit. What does this invoke in us? I think it invokes a kind of mixed reaction. On one hand, the instinctive response of denial, that how is this possible? Dying is so normal. Aging is normal. All around us, we see things are born, they grow, they mature, they age, and then they die. It kind of has fitted the scheme of things so well that all our endeavors, be it in arts, sciences, culture, have kind of stamped this understanding in all their efforts. Even spiritual philosophies assume this as an inevitable fact. Questions like what happens to us after death assumes that we are going to die. Does rebirth happen? Assumes we are going to die. The religions that talk about hell and heaven talk it as after death. Ecology, when we talk about leaving the planet green for our future generations, we assume that we are not going to be here forever. Dust thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul, says a poet. So this has been our experience all along. All our human endeavor has been around it. And yet, if I ask you, what is the deepest desire in your heart? For your physical, let's say. We don't need to ruffle our brains so much. We just need to eavesdrop into the secret heart's deepest desire. What is it? If we take 10 seconds to just close our eyes and think what we would want for our physical, I think all of us would want health, longevity, eternal youth, everlasting beauty, in short, immortality. And this is the secret desire of all human beings. Not only is this desire universal, but it has also been eternal. Literature has been replete with incidents where writers have sought immortality through their protagonists. Right from Homer, who in Iliad and Odyssey has Hera and Penelope have ambrosia and transform themselves into a flame of youth and beauty, or the recent Paulo Coelho, in his book Alchemist, looks for the philosopher's stone through his protagonist Santiago that can convert any metal into gold. In India, we've had the tales of Markandeya, Nachiketa, Savitri. There have been Tao's immortals in China. So it has been a recurring motif in our entire cultural patrimony. And can you guess what is one thing which is common to all these books? Well, they have all been bestsellers and they have continued to stay in publication and draw the attention of people. So this search for immortality is ingrained in all of us. This search for that elixir of life or that eternal fountain of youth whose waters can restore youth and beauty to anybody who partakes of them. And this fabled elixir of life, called by different names in different cultures, like ambrosia or the philosopher's stone or the nectar of immortality or amrit, are the spiritual metaphors which seek for that supreme catalyst by which we could achieve this immortality. As Sri Aurobindo says, the earliest formula of wisdom promises to be its last: God, light, freedom, and immortality. These four have been the highest seeking of man in the past and continue to do so in future: God, light, freedom, and immortality. Now you must be thinking that I'm telling you a fairy tale and we are too old for it. First of all, we are never old for fairy tales. And secondly, this fairy tale has actually happened. Mother and Sri Aurobindo have come and they have established this supreme catalyst, the supramental force, to which if we open ourselves, we will achieve the physical transformation or the great work which has been the search for millennia. I have been doing some research and I'll try to again project my screen. Sorry. So this is a chart of life expectancy. This is something, if you see, for the last 300 years. And suddenly from 1950, there is a spurt in the life expectancy of humans. Let us see a video and then analyze what has happened. What the video was trying to do was to say that how there has been a marked shift in the 50s. In all world records, 100 meter is considered the highest of physical fitness, and the record was broken. The Everest, which was not climbed till the 20th century, in the 50s it was done. So what is that corresponding thing that happened in the 1950s? It is the supramental descent. And that is the catalyst which has now made possible something which has never existed before. This entire surge we see in AI, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, the sizes of supercomputers reducing. It's because matter is becoming more and more conscious. And that is why the mother has said that we have to first start by believing that this is possible, that immortality is possible. So it is not a fairy tale just anymore. And it is most challenging work so far, because look at the distance that it seeks to cover. The raw material, this body that it begins with, and the final product that it aims to create, the starting point and the ultimate goal. What is the starting point? This body. And the ultimate goal is physical immortality. So where do we begin when we have to go for this? So we begin in our very understanding of who we are. So we understand our body as something ephemeral and phenomenal, as something ego encapsulated in mind, life, and body, which is mutable and perishable in this mutable and perishable world. So how is it possible? That is what baffles us. That how is it possible that this raw material can seek immortality, which is permanence? Now, the first thing we have to believe is that this understanding of our body that we have of ego encapsulated in mind, life, and body is a flawed understanding. We are not the ego, but we are the eternal spirit that is expressing itself in this mind, life, and body. And along with this flawed understanding, there are several beliefs that we have of aging that we have to discard. For instance, that aging is fatal or that it leads to death. It is not true. People do not die of old age, but they die of diseases associated with old age. It has been observed that if the diseases accompanying old age are arrested, then 99.9% of people can live for more than 120 years. There have been several civilizations even today, like Kazakhstan or Okinawa, where people have lived longer. The second myth we have, which we have to believe that we have to discard, is that aging is irreversible. We see everyone die, everyone age and die. We don't, but it is not true. Long-term meditators are observed to have a distinct discrepancy between their biological and chronological ages, sometimes up to even 20 years. Means they look 20 to 25 years younger. When people take up exercising in what is considered old age, even after 70 years, they exhibit several reversal patterns in their biological parameters, like blood pressure, visual thresholds, or hearing thresholds, bone density, and so on. Species like the honeybee, for instance, can reverse their biological clock if the colony wants us to be so. So aging is not irreversible. The third belief we have is that aging is genetic. Again, it is not true, because if our parents lived up to the age of 80, that may add 3 years to our lifetimes. But a good lifestyle, a right kind of living, can add more than 30 years to our lifetimes. Similarly, it is believed that aging is painful. We have all these concepts that we are retire and we become useless. Again, it is a belief that we have to discard, because you all know about Nanamal, this 101-year-old lady in Tamil Nadu who is a yoga teacher, and she continues to do yoga. Pablo Picasso, he died at the age of 89. Until 84 he was sculpting. John Mackenzie, he did a skiing expedition to North Pole at the age of 78. Herbert Kirk graduated at 90. At 85, he wanted to do his graduation, which he hadn't done before, and he went to it and did it. At the age of 102, he ran a 26-mile marathon, because before that he was a tennis player. He lost his eyesight and he took to marathon. We know of a lot of Guinness Book records where a lot of people have started martial arts training at the age of 90 and have got their black belts at 96. Kelucharan Mahapatra, the Odissi dancer, was dancing up to his, till his last days. Barbara Cartland, 99, 575 books, and she was writing into her 90th birthday. So aging need not be painful. It can be very, very happy and productive, is the fourth belief that we need to get rid of. To just give you and my own example, that when I read this for the first time in the Mother and Sri Aurobindo, that the physical is very, very plastic. It is just that our mind and vital, it tells it and feeds it with belief system. I wanted to try out in my own life, and I was 35. I picked up the most difficult sport, which was Russian ballet. And at the age of 35, I visited Kyiv in Ukraine and learned ballet, and also danced on point shoes. Why is it important to understand and believe in our mind that it is possible? Because we know the power of mind over matter. The whole problem is because of this materialistic view that we have of matter. We think of it as not energy, and we think what we see is the reality. But at the quantum level, 99.9% of what we think is us is actually empty space. As Deepak Chopra says, the essential stuff of matter is that it is non-stuff. And yet it is a thinking non-stuff. It actually believes in what it thinks and makes it happen on the ground. There are many examples of mind over matter. For instance, we all know about the placebo effect, the medicine look-alike, which when we have, our body begins to recover, because it is believed that the body starts believing, and Mother says it is faith that cures. There have been several instances where when one of the two spouses die, the other one also develops illness of the heart and dies soon if they have shared a very close relationship. There is an example of children who suffer from allergies of pollen from the flowers, and if you just show a plastic flower in front of them, even then they start sneezing because the mind associates that flower with a real flower. I have seen these ballerinas in Russia, where I was studying, that they used to be prima ballerinas, but at 35, for instance, they retire, and by 45, most of them lost their flexibility and their shape, because they was so ingrained in their minds that now we are useless and we cannot dance anymore. Whereas the Eastern paradigm is very different. We believe in martial arts. I've seen in Japan and other countries where people do till their 90s or even more, and so on. So the mind, first of all, the Mother says that we have this entire atavistic tendency of the past many, many thousands of years, that belief system which has percolated in our very cells, that belief that I'm going to die. And that is the first thing that we need to reverse and allow that there is a possibility of physical immortality. Now, This great task of physical transformation, Mother says that we need two things for it: an unfailing aspiration from below and a supreme grace from above that will answer. Both are necessary conditions. So at this point, I would like to tell you a story, and we would see how a student goes in search of this knowledge, and the knowledge is received by him and he achieves immortality. Now, this is the story from Kathopanishad of Nachiketa. It is a very practical treatise of entering Brahma Vidya. Upanishads are not philosophical speculations alone. They are not the black and white, linear thinking, but it is a product of a symbolic mind. There are symbols and myths. There are codes which need decoding, and the experience of the teacher to transmit the knowledge to the seeker. So Nachiketa had the god of death himself as his teacher. Who better to explain, to us than the very person assigned with the task? And we today have been very, very lucky to have the Mother and Sri Aurobindo as our teachers, because again, not only did they think or speculate or write about it, but they were experiencing in their lives. And this entire Savitri is Sri Aurobindo's experience of the supramental ascent. And the mother used to have those experiences when he was writing Savitri, and her entire book and their experiments are recorded in records of yoga and in the agenda. So just like Nachiketa had Yama for his teacher, we have the Mother and Sri Aurobindo today. And it is important to understand how Sri Aurobindo's immortality differs from what has been the understanding of immortality in the past few thousand years, when this knowledge of the Veda and Vedanta was lost to us. And it was recovered time and again, first by Shankaracharya ji himself, and then a lot of Western Indologists. And yet, as Sri Aurobindo has also said, and it is when one studies Shankaracharya, we see that the Advaitic approach, which says that this Jagat is mithya, where Brahman alone is true and this Jagat is mithya, has a very different path. It takes you to the immortality of consciousness, to the Brahman that is supporting it all. Whereas when Sri Aurobindo says that all this is Brahman, and also this world that he has created is Brahman, and it is not just the immortality of the consciousness which is to be achieved, but the immortality of the physical. We have 5 days to understand what it is in detail. Today I will just start with a story, and we would then go deeper into the story because it is full of symbols and myths, and that will give us insight into Sri Aurobindo's approach. So many of us would know the story, but for those of us who haven't, I would briefly tell the outer part of the story, which is there's a king called Vajashravas, and who is performing sacrifice. He has a son called Nachiketa, who sees that the father is giving in sacrifice things that he does not need or which are not beneficial to the beneficiaries, like cows which have become old and would never give milk, and so on. So he goes to the father and he feels that sacrifice is when you give something that is dearest to you. And since he thinks he's his son and he's dearest to him, he asks his father, "Whom would you give me?" And when the father does not pay attention on the first time, he asks 3 times, "Who would you give it to me?" And then the father says, "I give you to death." And that's when the journey of Nachiketa begins. He obeys his father, goes to Yama, where he waits for 3 nights and days. for Yama to return without eating anything. In the halls of death, he waits. And when Yama comes, he asks him that I have kept a Brahman waiting, and it is not good for anybody to keep a guest waiting. And so therefore, for 3 nights that you have been here, you can ask for 3 boons. And the entire body of the Upanishad is these 3 boons. And through these boons, the knowledge of how we can reach liberation and the state of immortality. So the first boon Nachiketa asks is that when he goes back to his father should recognize him and happily welcome him. And he should not be, he should be peaceful in his mind and not full of turmoil, his father. And Yama grants that. The second boon he asks is that there is a heavenly fire, or there is a heavenly world, where you are not, he tells Yama, where you are not there. Death is not there, nor old age, nor thirst, nor hunger. And there is a heavenly fire that is supposed to take you there. Can you please tell me of this heavenly fire? Vajrashravas tells him about the heavenly fire and says that not only I give you this knowledge, but henceforth this fire will be called Nachiketa. And the third boon then he asks is that having gone, some say that he exists and some say he exists not. Can you please tell me the truth? And this is the heart of the Upanishad, where Yama tells him that this is something which lots of tapasvins and people of the past have sought, but it is not something that he should ask for. And he asks him to have all the worldly riches and fame and everything in lieu of that. But Nachiketa says that to what end are these when you will finally come one day and they'll all be gone. They are impermanent. Give me the knowledge of the permanence of that eternal. And then Nachiketa tells him the whole secret of what happens when one is not. Now this in brief is the story, and it has 6 chapters, and each chapter deals with one aspect. It has been written and rewritten, a lot of commentaries have been written. After studying many of them, especially most of them based on Shankaracharya's commentaries, reach this conclusion that all this is, as I said, falsehood, and behind it all is Brahman, and that is where we should reach. Now that does not give one physical immortality, but we know that Nachiketa's story is about that. So to decode it, let us start from the very beginning. Vajrashravas. Who is Vajrashravas? The king. So Vajrashravas is made of 2 words, Vajra and Shravas, which is food and fame. So normally, ordinarily, Vajrashravas is known to mean somebody who is famous for his donations. And that is what the whole Upanishad begins with. But as we know, this is the product of the later mentality, which was very black and white and very linear. There's nothing intuitive about this. And Sanskrit has these roots which have several meanings, and there are several derived meanings. So while Vajra's derived meaning is food, the actual root means something that increases the strength, and food increases strength, so that is the derived meaning. Similarly, Shravas means that which is heard. And because fame is heard everywhere when you're famous, so it is thought to be fame. But actually, when you go to strength and what that is heard, the meaning that comes closer to that intuitive understanding would be that Vajrashravas represents the exoteric religion. the outer religion, which is coded, which can be talked about, written about, and which increases, by codifying by those experiences of those others. It helps increase of the universal power. It also means the body, the materiality. So Vajrashravas is the outward religion coded, the body and the materiality. And Nachiketa, what does it mean? Na is one that is not. Chi is Chaitanya. So Nachiketa is one who is not perceived. There is another meaning, which is Ketu is like going in a loop, that one who does not allow his energy or his Chaitanya to go in a loop. But a deeper symbolism is that which is not perceived. Because the Upanishad gives the example of the tinders, the logs of wood, which have in them Agni, but yet not perceivable. And Nachiketa therefore represents that spirit, that spiritual surge, which happens from time to time when religious codes have been codified. There is born a child, who wants to look at it again in a new way, because some of the past religions and the meanings have lost their inner significance. And so when Vajrashravas is making the donations, this Shraddha arises in Nachiketa. Now this Shraddha again is a very deep word. Normally it is said it to be faith, but it is not, because faith also was what Vajrashravas had when he was giving donations. He had this faith that he would accumulate merits. But the faith of Nachiketa is the faith that the inner being has come to know, the knowledge that the inner being, the subjective being has already had, and yet the objective mind has not yet understood. So it is that precursor of the knowledge that is yet to come. So when that arises in Nachiketa, he wants to understand the meaning of the sacrifice, and he feels that he should be the one given because he is the most precious. And then when Vajrashravas gives him to death, many scholars have interpreted it as he was upset because he asked him 3 times, and so he said, okay, I give you to death. But it is not so simplified. There is an importance of asking something thrice. We have Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha. We have 3 parts in our being, and the Upanishad later on goes on to kind of exploring those. We have the physical, the vital, and the mental. So when we ask 3 times, it is actually telling each part of us that yes, my physical is ready, my vital is ready, my mental is ready. The same is the thing when we say Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti thrice. Peace to my body, peace to my vital, peace to my mental. And these parts, which are individual, have their 3 cosmic counterparts also. So we talk about Shanti for the entire universe. Even in very traditional, these recent traditions, like in Christianity also, when the marriage happens, it is I do 3 times, or even talaq, talaq, talaq. So maybe this was the deeper meaning of why 3 times he asks. And when he says, I give you to death, now this is not just any death, like some have interpreted it as he's saying go to hell kind of a thing. But it is not so. So death in spirituality has a very deeper meaning. In the ancient rites of initiation, there was a mystic death that the initiate went through to be born anew. Dvija, we say, born twice, the Brahmin. So when the initiation happens, the older self has to die and a new self has to be born. And that is the mystic death to which Yama sends him. As I said, these are very deep scriptures, and right from very physical to very psychological, Mother has said that we can read many meanings into it. Like the psychological meaning here could be that it is the father who, when the child is born, he's actually pushing him to death by the very fact of giving birth to him, because he starts moving towards death. So this could be one of the interpretations, but the spiritual deeper interpretation is that one has to die, and that is what Sri Aurobindo also says, to be perpetually reborn is the condition of physical immortality. So that is the death. And then when Nachiketa starts walking towards the hall of death, he finds that he is alone. And therefore, he seeks and thinks about all those who have gone before him, all those who will come after him, because it is an experience that when one starts on the path, one is alone. And this initiation can lead to illness and madness and even death if the Adhara is not ready. So one takes a lot of heart in reading, and that is why we read the stories of Nachiketa, we read of Savitri and Satyavan. That is why Sri Aurobindo has written the whole Savitri, because what Savitri and Ashwapati's journeys entail is what each of us at some point are going to face it. Now we come to Yama, when Nachiketa reaches the hall of death. Who is Yama? Generally, there is a lot of fear associated with him. And yet in this Upanishad, he is the teacher. So there are a lot of Rigvedic references to Yama, and also references in other texts. So we also know that in Patanjali's yoga, the first is Yama, the first Ashtanga, which is restraint, control. Yama is also the twin of Yami. They are brothers and sisters. And it is said that Yami takes care of us between birth and death, and Yama, the twin brother, takes care of us between death and the next birth. It's because he is the first person who has died and has found the path of after death, what happens. And he is there to tell us and take care of our souls between the death and birth. He is also the higher self in the Gita. In the Gita, it is said that the self, which is the enemy of the self, and the self, which is the friend of the self. So here, the first self is capital S, the higher self, which is a friend of the lower self when the lower self has taken this decision to be purified, to go on the path. And it is the enemy of the lower self is the enemy of the higher self when it wants to do things as per itself. So Yama is actually for those like Mahakali, the swift in action. So Yama actually can be the teacher of those who decide to explore this path of immortality. Then we come to the next point where Nachiketa is waiting, and he waits for 3 days and nights. Again, this has a very spiritual significance. Generally, even Christ, it is said, had to wait for 3 days and 3 nights. We know this tradition in many learnings, like in Shaolin, they make you wait, till one is ready. So this 3 days is again a time when one is actually ready. Like if when we go for darshan, we know it's a 1 hour long queue, but then we are there for just a few seconds, but that is the preparation. And when Yama comes back, he says that since he is a guest, and it also says that he is a Brahmin and he waited for 3 days, I have to now attend to him, otherwise I will lose all my merits. Now this has a very, very important significance and symbolism, is that a Brahmin is one, or a guest is one, who is ready for knowledge. The lamp in his heart has been lit. And when the lamp has been lit, it is a crime to not give that knowledge when the soul is ready. Sri Aurobindo in the Life Divine talks about the 4 aids on the path. He says that there is the Guru, the Shastra, Utsaha, and the fourth is Kala, time. So Guru is the, in a way, the secret seated in the heart of us all, the inner guide. And I'll come to this because at the end of this Upanishad, the relevance of what this inner guide is, it'll be very evident to us. This is the inner guide, and the Shastra are the books which Madan Sri Aurobindo have written, the Upanishads, Vedas, or anything which helps us in our journey. Utsaha is the personal effort of the seeker, which is necessary. Aspiration, rejection, and surrender. Rejection is necessary as long as surrender is not complete. So that is the Utsaha, personal effort. And finally, Sri Aurobindo says Kala, time. You must have all seen in your lives that there is a time when you just want to learn something, and when that opportunity is presented, you just learn it. So respecting time is very important. And since the lamp in Nachiketa's heart has been lit and he was waiting there for 3 days, so Yama felt that he had made a soul ready for knowledge wait. And therefore, he says that ask me for 3 boons for the 3 nights that you have stayed, because otherwise I will not have, my merits will reduce. That is another way of saying that I should have been there when you came. Now in the Hall of Death, it is very important, it is mentioned that Nachiketa ate nothing. He fasted for 3 days. Now, these shlokas, they sometimes, we kind of miss these deeper issues. And many scholars also, they don't pay attention to this. But thankfully, because of Sri Aurobindo, we know the deeper meaning of this. So what is eating? Eating. So we know the story of, Persephone, right? Who, because she ate that pomegranate, she could not live. She had to stay also in Hades, in hell, with Hades. Similarly, there are Celtic, lots of fairy tales where when one goes to the other world, and if you want to return back with the wisdom that one has gained, then one should not eat anything. So eating is actually partaking of or assimilating something of that realm, and that leads to forgetfulness. So if one wants to reach the same plane, then one should have self-control and should not partake of that planes. And Amal Kiran, who I shared a very deep friendship, he once told me that he used to go out in the subtle planes and come back. So he used to tell me that nobody can tell me that this body is all that we have, because there are planes and I have experienced it. And there is a very thin line that connects the subtle body with the physical body. And partaking of other realms means in the vital world, in the subtle physical, there are very fine things. And if we get stuck to any of it and we start enjoying it, then we cannot come back to the physical. Sometimes the link is lost. So this entire story is of coming back to the body with that knowledge, Nachiketa's story. And therefore it is important here to note this point that he ate nothing, which means he did not partake of any of the in-between realms or planes. And now we come to the 3 boons. So Nachiketa, when he reaches there and Yama receives him and he says, because I've made you wait, which I shouldn't have, you can ask me 3 boons. So the first boon that he asks is that his father should recognize him, welcome him without anger and turmoil, and with a peaceful heart. Now, again, this has been interpreted in many ways. One is that he was a very obedient son, so he wanted his father to be happy, which is good. That also may be. The second interpretation is that he had crossed over to the other side, and by saying that I want to my father to be happy, he was very cleverly trying to, go back to the body. This is one interpretation. But Nachiketa, I don't think a sincere seeker like him would like to play these games, This has a deeper significance. And this significance arises from our first understanding of who is Vajrashravas and who is Nachiketa. So Vajrashravas is that exoteric religion which is codified and which forms that scripture. And out of it arises a new spirit, a new exploration. And when this exploration is made, there is often a resistance for the established traditionalists to accept that. And we see it all the time. Even today, the traditionalists who hold this knowledge of the Upanishads and the Vedas have a certain way of understanding. But this new spirit, let us say what Vivekananda has read into it or discovered new things as per the Yuga Dharma, or Sri Aurobindo, it is not very easy for the religion to take it and assimilate it. And this we see in many beautiful stories. For instance, if you have read Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the gull, after she learned how to fly, she wanted to come back and share her learnings with the others because she felt. And when Nachiketa wants to come back to the father, it is not out of an individual selfish reason. It is to share that knowledge, with the rest of the world, as in the case of Jonathan Livingston Seagull, or even Plato, when he talks about the allegory of the cave, where the people who are inside the cave, who see only shadow, at one point want to go out and explore, where is this light coming from whose shadows are cast on this wall? And they go out and they see there's a whole new world. There's a three-dimensional world, not the two-dimensional cave, And they want to come back into the cave and tell their fellow beings, their fellow brothers, that there is a world out there. And then not many understand them. Sometimes in the medieval Catholic times, Catholicism, this Holy Inquisitions were met with very brutal ends. When the seekers came back with new understanding, they said, the older generation said that it is not something that it's a new wine that cannot fit in an old bottle. And sometimes they were always, dealt with very brutally. Even in the Rig Veda, the very first hymn, which is about Agni, it says the Nutana Rishayaha and the old rishis. So there were older rishis, even in the Vedic period, who will come to this in detail, but who had a different perception of Agni. Agni was, by the older rishis, looked at as the fire that helps in tapasya. Agnif purvebhir rishibhiridyo nutane ruta. So, whereas the Nutana Rishayaha, they were seeing Agni as Idya. Idya is that which can be loved. And when I deeply studied and tried to find out, my teacher, who's my teacher of the Vedas, Vladimir, he pointed out to me this, that the older rishis used Agni, the same force, as the tapasya. Whereas the newer rishis used it as the power of love, because in the olden times, the psychic being had not yet appeared on earth. So the psychic fire, which is based on love, was not there in the olden times. And so this path of tapasya and path of surrender are two very different paths. And Ramakrishna talks about it, about the way of the monkey and the way of the baby cat. The monkey kind of holds on to the mother because it fears that it may get dropped anywhere. And that is the path of tapasya, completely personal effort. Whereas the path of the cat, baby cat, only it has to surrender. And it is taken by the mother. It is held by the mother and taken everywhere. So this is the deeper understanding of why Nachiketa, the first boon he wants is to go back, because he wants to share that with the rest of the world. And also the other deeper meaning of Vajrashavas and Nachiketa is body and spirit. So the spirit has to go into the body. Even though the world is full of suffering, and there are several paths which talk about complete renunciation and considering the world as suffering and Maya, but for life-affirming spirituality, we should be grateful that we have birth, because it is only in birth that the psychic flame grows. It is only in birth that the seeking for eternal happens, and it does not happen in non-birth. And therefore, the first wish of Nachiketa is to go back to the father. So this is the deeper significance of the first boon. That immortality can, the seeking for immortality can only happen in the body. Nachiketa is the spirit that wants to go back to the body. The father is always representative of the body, that which has given birth. And also he wants to share with the older tradition his new findings so that it can be assimilated. So this is the first boon, and Nachiketa is granted the boon. Yama says that your father will sleep peacefully after you go back, having known that you have been released from death, and he will welcome you and recognize you happily. So that is the first boon. Then Nachiketa moves on to the second boon. He says that there is a heavenly world where you are not, he tells Yama, where there's no death, and there's no hunger, and there's no thirst. And I know of a heavenly fire that can take you there, the Swar world or the higher world. Can you tell me of that fire? And again, in many philosophies, this has been kind of misunderstood. The Agni here has been misunderstood as the Karma Kand part of knowledge. So that is a gross misunderstanding of the Vedic paradigm. And therefore the Vedantic paradigm, which is the knowledge, the path of metaphysical knowledge, kind of disregards the Vedic knowledge as something which is just ritualistic and karma kand and so on. So in many of these texts, one does not find a deeper meaning of what is this fire and what one is talking about. But this is where Sri Aurobindo comes to our help, and he actually has dwelt on it very, very deeply. So this is the secret knowledge, and the fire, Yama tells him, is that it is deep within your heart is the fire. And having ignited it, you'll have to ignite the 3 fires and unite with the other 3 and do the 3 acts. That is all the text of Kathopanishad says. And the deeper symbolism here is that when this fire is the psychic being, the discovery of the psychic being. And once this fire has been discovered, it has to ignite the other 3 fires, which is it has to transform the physical, the vital, and the mental. And unite with the 3. What are these 3? These 3 are the inner fires. We have a subliminal self, the inner vital, the inner mental, and the inner physical. We will go into all these over the next few days, the details of these planes and parts of the being. And so we ignite the 3 fires, unite with the 3 Purushas, the Annamaya, Pranamaya, and the Manomaya Purushas, which are the inner selves, and do the 3 acts, which means the mind, life, and the body has to, with the light of the psychic, perform these acts. And Yama is very happy to see that Nachiketa can repeat after him and understand all that he's saying. And he says that henceforth, this fire will be called after your name, Nachiketa. And he gives him a garland of, he gives him a garland. And that garland has a deeper meaning also to it. It is the Prakriti, one who is who has the psychic being and has purified the 3. The Prakriti is under his control, and this garland is made of all the syllables of the Kali, denoting the Prakriti, the multitudinous, the multiplicity. And that is how this fire comes to be known as Nachiketa. And then he moves to the final boom, and he asks that what happens when one has passed beyond? Some say that he is, and some say that he is not. And this is where Yama is stumped, because he says that a lot of people have sought this, but it's better not to go there because it's a very deep knowledge. It's a secret of secrets. And he tries to tell him that I'll give you fame and long life and all the wealth and all the pleasures of the world. And Nachiketa, one by one, denies them all, saying that this is what I need because all these are impermanent and with you they will be gone. But you are the only one who can give me this knowledge. So why should I not take from you what only you can give? And why should I take with something that with you will be gone? And he says that you please tell me this knowledge. And again, in most of these, the Advaitic philosophy, this is a question which has been differently understood. It is translated as what happens to soul when it dies. But if you see, this is not the question here, because Nachiketa is already waiting in the halls of death. He already knows that he can go back to his father. He knows now of the eternal fire, the psychic fire, which can, immortalize. So he wouldn't ask this question that what happens to soul after it is dead. So actually, after the body is dead. So what he is actually asking is, the word here is prete, those who have gone beyond. And what is this beyond? It is not beyond the body, the soul having gone. It is what happens to those, the question is what happens to those who are liberated, who have attained nirvana. And what happens to those? Are they, some say they are here, some say they are not here. And this is where it suddenly begins to make sense, because this is the question. After the psychic being has been found, after the inner subliminal purushas have been, experienced, and this in Sri Aurobindo's terminology correspond to the two big, milestones. The first is psychicization, finding my inner, psychic being, and the second is spiritualization. Spiritualization is finding that unity consciousness, the cosmic, the Hiranyagarbha, one with that, which is the fulfiller of all desires and where there is no fear. And why so? Because why do we have fear? Fear is a fear of another, or fear of another something. But when one is not this individuality and one is completely the cosmic self, there is no another, and therefore there is no fear. And there is no desire left, because again, desire is a product, like fear, of separative consciousness. I want something because I think it to be other than me. So when the soul achieves the cosmic oneness, which is in Sri Aurobindo's word, the spiritualization, there is nothing outside which it does not have within itself. As the Isha says, Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam Yat Kincha Jagatyam Jagat. So all this is for the inhabitation of the Lord, all that is moving in this moving universe. Tena Tyaktena Bhunjitha Ma Gridha Kasyas Vidhanam. We'll come to this again and again, because the Kena Upanishad, the Mandukya of Om, the Isha are all interconnected and they build on each other in this entire Brahma Vidya. And so Nachiketa at this stage has had these two siddhis of psychicization and spiritualization. And now what he's seeking from Yama is the knowledge of what Sri Aurobindo calls supramentalization, or the knowledge of the eternal, and the transcendental. Supramental and the transcendental. So these are, today I'm introducing you to all these terminologies, but we will go over the next 4 days into the details of what these are, which planes and parts of the being are these. And then this is the first chapter, ends here. And then the next 5 chapters are all about going detail into these things. So what basically Nachiketa is asking him in the third boon, and which is also something Maitreyi, the wife of Yajnavalkya, asks him in the, I think, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that what happens? So the Rishi gives this answer, and we will end with that simile today and open to various questions, and then take it up again from tomorrow. So Yajnavalkya says that what happens to a pinch of salt when it is put in a glass of water? It is at the top of the glass, it is at the middle, it's at the end. It is there. It is there, but it is everywhere. And it is not there separately as salt, but when you drink the water, you taste it. So this is the Brahma Gyan that Nachiketa wants to know, that after the cosmic liberation, what happens? And we will continue with this tomorrow, and also come back to, therefore, what is it in our daily lives? You know, this is a supreme alchemy that we are talking about. From this baser metal like lead, you know, which is ephemeral and impermanent. The alchemy we are talking about is converting this lead into gold, you know, of permanence, of beatitude, from the suffering and death and decay to youth and, you know, Satchidananda. So this is the journey that we'll cover, and tomorrow we will go into the details of what in daily life, what is that, what is outer alchemy, what is inner alchemy, and what is it that we need to do. And we will also touch upon other various myths and go into the depths of the symbolism, like the myth of Shunakshepa. He also goes in search of immortality, and finally the Divine Mother grants him immortality. And also finally Savitri. You know, what was the yoga of Ashwapati and what was the yoga of Savitri. And to summarize, what we covered today is that aging is a myth, dying is a bad habit, evokes in us 2 reactions. And we know from the theory of duality is that any duality points to both of them being true and yet both of them being partial. So when our first instinct is it's not possible, maybe it is true, but it is partial. But there is something in us says that yes, it is possible. And it has been the search for millennia. That is also truth, and yet it is partial. And we have to find a higher synthesis, that if it is possible, under what conditions. And then we moved on to what are those conditions. And as the mother has said, the first condition is that we have to start believing in our minds that it is possible. Because we know mind over matter. We know the power of awareness and the power of observation. We know that if we are aware of a particular thing, we can change it. And this is what Heisenberg, in his uncertainty principle, also physics has proven it at the quantum level, that by the very act of observation, we can change something. So when the mind is focused on a certain idea, that is where our awareness goes, and where our awareness goes, that becomes a reality. So please, from today, let us do this as a exercise. Please start believing that it is possible to achieve physical immortality. Now the how of it, the why of it, we will cover. But the first step, and this is what the mother has said, that I need just 12 people to believe and it can be done. And the reason why, Amal used to tell me that it was believed in the ashram in those days that it would happen in the lifetimes of the sadhaks. But it couldn't happen because in the agenda, mother says that she needed 12 people who were ready. And they weren't ready. And so it has been postponed by a few 100 years. So to believe that it is possible is the first step. And we discussed so many examples of how the beliefs of aging are not true. It is neither fatal. It is not aging that causes death, but diseases that cause death. It is not irreversible. If it can happen in a honeybee, or it can happen for people who begin to exercise or meditate, can there be more processes that we can, have to make it irreversible, make it reversible, or to stall it? The third thing is, it is not genetic. I know of many people who live with this fear that, even yesterday I was talking to somebody that in their family everybody passed away between 40 to 50 years, and so this person has this fear that the same thing will happen to me, and it is this fear that makes us attract. So aging is not genetic. It can only add 3 years, a good genes, but good lifestyle and a good attitude and a good practice, good way of living can add up to 30 years to your lifetime. And aging need not be painful. It can be, in fact, fun, because youth, they say, is wasted on the young, because when they have youth, have energy, they don't have the wisdom. So when we are young, even in so-called chronological old age, then we are not wasting the youth. So aging is not painful. We saw a lot of examples of Barbara Cartland, of Nannamal, and so on. And then we discussed how mind impacts matter, and went into the story of Nachiketa, which was an introduction to this search and the process, which we would take up in detail over the next 5 days. And I think 5 years is not a wrong thing, because not just 5, it is a subject matter of the next maybe 5 lifetimes, or if one is not practicing it or doing it.